time trial. It was in Paris in 1989 between the Palace of Versailles and the Champs-Élysées.
Greg LeMond trailing Laurent Fignon last day of the Tour de France. Everybody thought Fignon had plenty of an advantage going into this, but Greg LeMond had different ideas and scorched the course. Absolutely terrifying around some of the corners. He was going so quickly. It was really astounding to watch. At the end of the day, he had 8 seconds on his rival Fignon, and a bitter loss to Fignon, who had started the last day in the yellow jersey. And Greg LeMond, wow, one of the greatest finishes in the history of the Tour de France, no doubt about that.
And the face of Fignon on the left. Couldn't believe it. Let's get more on that from Steve Perino.
Well, you may also have noticed in those images that Greg LeMond was on what was the first ever iteration of the aerobars. And I have personal stake in this story because those aerobars come from the very town that I live in Sun Valley, Idaho. And this is the origin story that I got from a friend of mine who worked at the company called Scott at the time. His name, Jojo McNeil, and he was there through the entire development. Now, those bars were actually the sort of the brainchild of one Boone Lennon. He was a U.S. ski team coach. When I was on the U.S. ski team, he coached the women. I was on the men's side, but that was at an era when we spent a lot of time in the wind tunnel. And he spent all of his winters trying to get skiers more aerodynamic, but in the summertime, he was a master's bike racer, and he couldn't figure out why he ended up looking like a sail. And so he had this idea that he would create a more aerodynamic handlebar. And get this, the first ever iteration of the aerobars, a cut-off wood toilet seat that he strapped on to his bars. And what happened was he was riding it around the town of Sun Valley when some people from Scott noticed, like, what are you doing with that? And said, I think we've got some people that might be able to make something a little bit more sophisticated. In fact, there was a guy by the name of Charlie French, who was an engineer, also a triathlete. And that is when they created the bars that looked like the ones that ended up on his actual bike. But that was in about 1987. It was a much easier to sell to the triathlon community. They were all over it. Pro cycling, however, was a little bit more reluctant to take on this new technology. But this is how they tested how fast it was. There's a little slope outside of town, and they took a Schwinn Varsity, which is a $99 bike. It's a 10-speed. It's a little bit like a commuter on the way to school. And on the other side, they bought a $10,000 East German, that's how long ago it was, TT bike. And they ran them side by side. The one with the bars on what was called Phantom Hill, no matter what they did, always came up faster. And Boone Lennon was committed to the idea he had to get this information in the hands of Greg LeMond, who I don't believe he even knew. So he went to the Tour de France on the eve of the '89 Tour, and he tried to sell LeMond on this idea. When he left and went back to Idaho, he wasn't sure if LeMond was going to use it, when in fact LeMond actually started playing with the idea throughout the Tour. And then in the final time trial, well, we know the story. But of course, his mechanic had to bring it to the UCI to see if they would allow it. And they said, you know, Greg's back's not feeling so good, so he's going to have to lay down on these. Can he use them? And they said, fine. And the rest is history.
Thank you very, very much, Steve. What's your memories of that?
Well, I remember the Europeans were very reluctant to adopt that, and Greg had used them in the earlier time trials in that year's Tour de France to great effect. Took a lot of time out of Laurent Fignon in the time trial previously, the long one, and still it wasn't adopted by the Europeans. So that reluctance, that sticking to tradition by the Europeans and the team of Laurent Fignon was a significant advantage in the final time trial. Whether or not was the difference of winning and losing, that's open to some speculation, but it probably didn't hurt Greg LeMond.
Well, he started 50 seconds behind Laurent Fignon, who beat him and won the race by 8 seconds. Now, they were a one-piece handlebar, no fitments at all, weren't they? The Boone Lennon bars.
It was sort of like a U, if I remember, bolted on the opposite ends from what you see nowadays onto the crossbar. And there were specialized time trial bikes, but they were basically just put you in a lower position with your arms closer to the front wheel. So the time trial bars that Greg LeMond used came around in a sort of U shape in the front of his bicycle. And I remember watching that, and I just could not believe it was a significant difference in speed. It was you could see it happening in front of you. So Greg LeMond, That was his second of 3 Tour de France titles, and one of the greatest American cyclists of all time, Greg LeMond, and a real innovator, not just in time trial bars and bikes, but also first guy to use shield sunglasses and hardshell helmets, and Greg LeMond was a real pioneer in his day, and everybody else had to catch up with Greg LeMond over the years. That I remember, he would come up with something new, and then a few months later, everybody would have it.
And Greg LeMond really did change history, or was it Boone Lennon? Anyway, let's just check in on Cavendish's race.